The penthouse elevator opened at 11:47 p.m., and Lawrence Holt stepped into his own home, like a man walking into someone else's life. He hadn't called ahead. The Singapore deal had collapsed faster than anyone predicted. 12 hours of negotiations. $200 million evaporating across a conference table. And Lawrence had been on the first flight back to New York before the ink had even dried on the termination agreement. Rebecca, his assistant, had offered to send a car, to notify the building, to do any of the dozen small things that normally cushioned the edges of his life. He'd told her no to all of it. He just wanted to go home. The apartment was dark except for the kitchen light, which cast a pale rectangle across the marble floor. Lawrence set down his briefcase, loosened his tie, and registered 3 things in the span of about 4 seconds. A car seat by the couch, a folded blanket that wasn't his, and, coming from the direction of the guest room, the unmistakable sound of a baby crying. He stood very still. The crying softened, turned into small hiccuping sounds, and then a voice he recognized immediately, low and steady and careful, said, "Shh, it's okay. We're okay." Lawrence walked down the hallway and stopped in the doorway of the guest room. Adele Marsh was sitting on the floor, her back against the bed frame, a baby against her chest. The baby couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Adele's dark hair was loose and tangled, and she was wearing a gray sweatshirt that swallowed her whole. She had a small lamp on the floor beside her, and in its warm circle of light, she looked like something out of a painting, exhausted and fierce and completely unaware he was standing there. Then the baby made a sound, and Adele looked up. The color left her face. Lawrence. His name came out barely above a whisper. He looked at her. He looked at the baby. He looked at her again. "Whose child is that?" he asked. Adele's jaw tightened. She shifted the baby slightly, one hand cupping the back of its tiny head. "Mine," she said, and then quieter, "Ours." The word hit him somewhere behind the sternum. He gripped the doorframe. The hallway felt like it was tilting. He was a man who had survived hostile takeovers, a father who walked out when Lawrence was 9, a company that nearly bankrupted itself in 2019 before he pulled it back by sheer will. He did not tilt. He did not grip doorframes. "How old?" he said. It wasn't really a question. 5 weeks. He did the math. He did it twice, because the first time his brain refused to complete the calculation. "You were pregnant." The words came out flat. Yes, when you left." Adele looked down at the baby. "I know. You left, Adele. You handed me back the key to this apartment, and you told me you needed a clean break, and you were." He stopped. Started again. "You were already pregnant." "Yes." He pushed off the doorframe and walked away before he said something he couldn't take back. Lawrence didn't sleep. He sat in his office, with the city spread out below him, like a circuit board, all light and movement, and the illusion of order. He poured 2 fingers of scotch and didn't drink it. He called his lawyer, and then hung up before the phone rang. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and thought about 5 weeks. 5 weeks he hadn't known. 5 weeks she'd been in his apartment, apparently, though he'd never given her a key. He'd have to figure out how that happened. 5 weeks of his daughter existing in the world without him knowing her name. His daughter. He put his head down on his arms and stayed there a while. By 6 in the morning, Lawrence was in the kitchen making coffee. He heard her before he saw her. The slow, careful footsteps of someone moving around a sleeping baby. And then Adele appeared in the doorway, the baby in a carrier strapped to her chest. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You owe me a lot more than that." She flinched. He hadn't meant it as a blow, but he saw it land like one, and some part of him that was still reasonable felt bad about that. He poured a second mug of coffee and set it on the counter near her. She took it with her free hand and held it without drinking. "When did you find out?" he asked. 3 days after I left." He laughed, short and humorless. 3 days, I know. Why didn't you call me?" Adele looked down at the baby. Her daughter. Their daughter. The baby had dark hair and the particular set of a jaw that Lawrence had only ever seen in photographs of himself as an infant. He was trying not to stare at it. He was failing. Because, Adele said slowly, "I'd already made my decision, and a pregnancy felt like." She stopped. "It felt like a reason you'd feel obligated to undo it, and I didn't want that. So you decided what I'd feel. I decided what I knew. Lawrence, you told me yourself." Her voice was steady, controlled, the same voice she'd used when she'd handed him back the key. He'd admired that steadiness once. Right now it made him want to put his fist through a wall. "You told me that commitment wasn't something you were built for, that you'd always choose the work. You said it like it was just a fact about yourself." "I was being honest." "I know. That's why I believed you." The baby made a small sound, something between a sigh and a hum, and Adele's whole body shifted automatically. Just a slight adjustment of her stance, a tightening of her hand at the baby's back. Lawrence watched the movement and felt something happen inside his chest that he didn't have a word for yet. "What's her name?" he asked. Something in Adele's face softened, just slightly. "Nadia." He turned it over in his mind, Nadia. He said it once, quietly, like testing something fragile. "You can stay," he said, "here, until you find something." Adele looked up at him. "Lawrence, not for any other reason, practically. The apartment is large enough and you're clearly." He looked at the dark circles under her eyes, at the way she was holding herself like someone who hadn't sat down in days. "You need help, and she's mine. I'm not going to pretend she isn't." Adele studied him for a long moment with those careful dark eyes, looking for the catch. He'd always appreciated that about her. She never took anything at face value. It had been one of the things that made her invaluable in the boardroom. Back when she'd been his VP of strategy, back before everything between them had blurred past the line it was never supposed to cross. "Okay," she said finally. "For now." The nursery took shape over 3 days. Lawrence had never particularly thought about what it would feel like to buy furniture for a child. He'd always filed it under a category of experience that belonged to other people. The ones who came home at 6, who coached Little League, who had entire rooms of their apartments dedicated to someone smaller than themselves. He had an office that took up the second bedroom. He had a life that fit into the hours he chose to fill it. By the end of the 3rd day, the second bedroom had a white crib, a glider he'd had delivered same day, blackout curtains, and a small mobile with planets that turned slowly in the draft from the air conditioning. He'd ordered too much. He knew he'd ordered too much. He didn't stop. Adele stood in the doorway when he turned the mobile on for the first time, Nadia asleep against her shoulder. "You didn't have to do all of this," she said. "I know, Lawrence." He looked at her. "I missed 5 weeks. I can't get them back. I can't get the whole pregnancy back." He turned the mobile off, then on again, watching the planets drift. "Buying a crib is not the same thing, I know that, but it's the thing I can do tonight." Adele was quiet. Then she said, "Do you want to try?" He looked at her, at Nadia. "She won't break," Adele said. He crossed the room, and Adele transferred Nadia into his arms, with the careful efficiency of someone who'd been doing it for 5 weeks already, and still remembered being terrified the first time. Nadia was impossibly light and completely solid at the same time. She smelled like something clean and warm. Her eyes were closed, one of her tiny hands flexed and then stilled. "Hi," Lawrence said, very quietly. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He stopped. "I'm your father" felt too large for the room, too large for the moment. He held her instead, and said nothing, and felt something shift in the architecture of himself, something load-bearing, something he hadn't known was movable. When he looked up, Adele was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "I should feed her," she said softly. He handed Nadia back. As Adele turned toward the door, he said her name. She paused. "I'm going to need you to tell me everything," he said. "Not tonight, but soon. I need to understand what happened, really understand it." She didn't turn around. "I know," she said, and walked out. The first 3 days, Lawrence called his CFO every morning. By the 4th day, he called once in the afternoon. By the end of the first week, he'd told his assistant to push his schedule 2 weeks and gone back to fielding emails only at night, after Nadia was down. Adele noticed. He could tell she noticed. But she didn't say anything about it, just the same way she didn't say anything when he started waking up for the early morning feeding to keep her company. Not helping exactly, since there wasn't much he could do, but present, sitting on the floor of the nursery with a cup of coffee, talking quietly about nothing, while Adele sat in the glider, and Nadia ate and the city outside did whatever cities do at 4 in the morning. "You don't have to do this," Adele said one night, around the 3rd week. "Which part?" "This." She gestured vaguely at the room, at him, at all of it. The vigil. I know I don't have to. She looked at him. He looked back. Why then? He thought about it seriously, the way she deserved. Because being somewhere else while she exists feels wrong. I didn't know that was possible. To feel the absence of something I didn't know I had. But I feel it now, so. He shrugged. I'm here. Adil looked down at Nadia for a long moment. When she looked back up, there was something careful in her eyes. Something that might, under other circumstances, have been hope. She's starting to track movement, Adele said. Watch. She moved her finger slowly across Nadia's line of sight, and Nadia's eyes followed it, slow and deliberate and completely certain. Lawrence watched this for several seconds without speaking. He started. I know, Adele said, and she was smiling. It was the first time he'd seen her smile in 3 weeks, and something in him came loose. The knock at the door came on a Tuesday afternoon, sharp and deliberate, while Adele was asleep and Lawrence had Nadia in the kitchen attempting to make lunch one-handed. He opened the door and found Priya Sundaram. Priya was his COO. She was 42, precise, and wore suits that cost more than most people's cars. She was also the only person at Holt Capital who would actually show up at his apartment uninvited rather than sending a strongly worded email. Her eyes went from Lawrence to Nadia and back. That, she said carefully, is a baby. Observant as always, Lawrence. She stepped inside without being invited, which was typical. You've pushed every major deliverable by 2 weeks. Cartwright is threatening to take the Meridian deal to Solberg instead. The board is. I told them you had a family emergency, because clearly that's what this is, but they're going to want answers. Nadia chose that moment to make an extremely unimpressed noise, and Lawrence shifted her automatically to his other arm. Priya watched this with undisguised fascination. Is she yours? Yes. Who's the mother? Adel. The silence that followed was significant. Adel Marsh, Priya said. Your former VP of strategy. Yes. Who left the company 14 months ago. Correct. Priya sat down on the couch without being asked. Lawrence, how long have you known? 3 weeks. Another silence. Priya pressed her fingers together, thinking. She was very good at thinking quickly, which was why he'd hired her. Okay, she said finally. Here's what we're going to do. I'll push Cartwright another week and personally assure him you'll take the call. The Meridian terms aren't as advantageous as you think anyway. I've been wanting to renegotiate Clause 4. The board can wait. I know they can wait. Lawrence. Priya's voice shifted. Lost the efficiency. Are you all right? He looked at Nadia, who was looking at the ceiling with the intense concentration of someone working out a very important problem. No, he said honestly. I'm about 40% functional, but I'm getting there. Priya nodded. The 40% that's here is more than most people's 100. She stood, straightening her jacket. I'll handle Cartwright. She gestured at Nadia. Whatever her name is, Nadia. Priya paused at the door. Does she know? She asked. Adil, does she know that you're? I don't know what I am yet. Does she know you're trying to figure it out? He thought about 4 in the morning on the nursery floor. He thought about Adele's face when Nadia had tracked the movement of her finger. He thought about the way she'd handed Nadia over to him. The trust in that motion, the deliberateness of it. I think so, he said. After Priya left, he took Nadia to the window and showed her the city. She wasn't old enough to see it yet. Not really, but he described it to her anyway. The river, the bridges, the way the light hit the buildings in the afternoon. He didn't know why. It just felt like something worth doing. Adele found him there 20 minutes later, still talking quietly to a 6-week-old baby about the Manhattan skyline. She leaned against the wall and watched him. He heard her come in but kept talking because Nadia had her eyes open and was doing the focused, serious thing she did sometimes when she was paying close attention, and he didn't want to interrupt. When he finished, he turned around. Priya came, he said. I know, I heard. Adele crossed her arms. You should take the call, Lawrence. With Cartwright. You don't have to. I'll take it Thursday. She blinked. You said you were pushing everything 2 weeks. I moved it up. Priya's right. The terms need renegotiating anyway, and I can do both. The call is an hour. I'll do it from the office and come back. He said it simply, like it was obvious. She stared at him like he'd said something in a language she was still translating. I don't need you to. A deal. He said her name the way you say something when you want a person to stop talking and listen. She stopped. He continued, I'm not doing this out of obligation. I know what obligation looks like. I've operated on it for 15 years. This is different. I don't have a name for it yet, but I know the difference. The room was quiet. Nadia made a small sound, turning her head. She's going to want lunch, Adele said, after a moment. I know. He handed Nadia over, careful in the way he'd been practicing being careful. Thursday 1 hour, and then I'm back. Adele looked at him. He looked back. Okay, she said. He was gone for 3 hours, not 1, because Cartwright turned an hour into 2, and the renegotiation Lawrence had wanted to table got started faster than expected. He texted Adele from the car on the way back, running over. Cartwright. Sorry, she replied. Nadia is fine. Take your time. He did not take his time. He was in the elevator before the reply finished loading. When he walked in, Adele was in the kitchen nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold, and Nadia was asleep in the bassinet in the living room. Adele looked up at him, then at the clock, then back at him. It's 3 hours, she said. I know. Cartwright is. He stopped. It doesn't matter, I said. Adele was quiet. He sat down across the table from her and they were quiet together for a while. What is this? She asked finally, carefully. What is what? This, she gestured between them. The being here. The 4 a.m. floor sitting. I need to know what you think this is, Lawrence, because I can't. She stopped, pressed her lips together. When she started again, her voice was steadier. I can't make peace with something temporary. I won't do that to her, and I won't do it to myself. So I need to know what you think you're doing. He had known this conversation was coming. He'd been running through versions of it for 2 weeks. I think, he said slowly, that I spent a long time believing I wasn't capable of this. The sustained presence, the showing up. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. And I think you believed me because I'd given you every reason to. And I think you were right to make the decision you made, because at the time, it was probably accurate. Adele watched him. But I'm not the same person I was 14 months ago. I'm not even sure I'm the same person I was 6 weeks ago. He looked up at her. She changed something. I don't know how to explain what or how to prove it to you except to keep showing up and let time do the rest. And if you change your mind, I won't. Lawrence, I know, that's what someone says who's going to change their mind. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to let me show you instead of asking you to believe me. That's different. Adele was quiet for a long time. She needs consistency, she said finally. It's not optional. If you're going to be here, you have to actually be here. I know. And if something goes wrong, if the business, if Cartwright or the board or any of it, I am not going to watch you choose everything else over us. I won't survive that again. The again landed quietly, like something she hadn't meant to say out loud. Lawrence didn't look away from it. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking for the chance to build something worth trusting. If I fail, he stopped. When I fall short, because I will sometimes, I want to be the kind of person who comes back and tries again, not the kind who disappears. Adele looked down at her cold tea. She's going to be awake in 20 minutes, she said finally. She's been off schedule all day, then I'll be here. Adele didn't say anything else, but she didn't leave. They sat in the quiet apartment while their daughter slept, and outside, the city moved without them. 6 months later, Lawrence was at a board meeting when his phone buzzed with a photo. Adele. Nadia sitting up on her own for the first time, wobbling and delighted, her arms out for balance. She looked exactly like Lawrence in every photo he had from when he was 7 months old. The resemblance was almost unreasonable. He looked at the photo for a full 30 seconds in the middle of a presentation about third-quarter returns. Then he said, Gentlemen, I have somewhere to be, and closed his folder. Priya caught his arm on the way out. The Meridian vote. Email me. Vote yes on 12, no on 7, and tell them I'll call tomorrow. He was already in the hallway. She's sitting up. He heard Priya laugh behind him. It was the first time he could remember hearing her laugh in a year. They moved to a different apartment eventually, smaller, in a quieter neighborhood, close to a park where Adele had started taking Nadia in the mornings. The penthouse had always felt like a stage set to Lawrence, a version of success designed to impress people he'd never actually liked very much. The new place felt like somewhere people lived. Lawrence started coming home for dinner. Not every night in the beginning. Old habits are stubborn, and the business was real, and there were weeks where he fell short. But most nights, he learned the difference between Nadia's hungry cry and her tired cry. Though Adele would tell you he was still wrong about 30% of the time. He made coffee every morning, and Adele made dinner most evenings, and on Sundays, they walked to the farmer's market 3 blocks over, and Nadia rode in the carrier on Lawrence's chest and fell asleep within 10 minutes of them setting out, every single time. He stopped measuring success by quarterly returns. He started measuring it by whether he was home before Nadia's bedtime. It wasn't perfect. There were months when the work surged back, and he had to be pulled away from it by the awareness of what he was missing. There were nights he came home to find Adele quiet and withdrawn, and he'd learned, slowly, through the patient work of paying attention, that quiet usually meant she needed to be asked, not fixed. He was better at asking than he'd been. Still not as good as he wanted to be. But he showed up the next morning. That was the thing. He kept showing up. One evening, about 8 months after the night he'd come home to find Adele on the guest room floor, he found her at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and a laptop. She looked up when he came in. "I've been in touch with Riverside Elementary," she said. "They have an opening for a 3rd grade teacher next fall. I have a meeting with the principal Thursday." Lawrence set down his bag. "I thought you were happy with the consulting work." "I am, but I've been thinking." She looked at Nadia, who was in the high chair conducting a serious investigation into a piece of mango. "I want to do something that matters the way she matters. Something where I'm looking at small humans all day trying to figure out how they work." She glanced back at him. "Is that strange?" "No," he said. "It sounds exactly like you." Adele smiled, not the careful guarded smile she'd worn for the first 2 months he was back in her life. The real one. The one that reached her eyes and made her look like herself. He stood there in the kitchen doorway for a moment, just taking stock of the room, his daughter, this woman, the mango investigation, the stack of papers on the table, the completely ordinary miracle of it. "How did the board meeting go?" Adele asked. "Fine. Voted on Meridian. Going to be an interesting year." He crossed the room, kissed the top of Nadia's head, then kissed Adele's. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." She reached up and squeezed his hand. He held on. From the high chair, Nadia held up a piece of mango with the expression of someone making an important announcement. "Yes," Lawrence told her solemnly. "That is absolutely mango." Nadia beamed at him. He thought about the man who'd stood in the doorway of the guest room 8 months ago, certain that the version of life unfolding before him belonged to someone else. He thought about how long he'd believed that, how thoroughly he'd believed it. He hadn't been wrong about himself. Not exactly. He'd been a version of himself that couldn't have done this. The change wasn't something that happened to him. It was something he'd built, one morning at a time, one choice at a time, the same way he'd built everything else that had ever lasted. Some things you can't acquire. You can only grow into them, slowly, if you're willing to stay.